So today's agenda, we're going to go through slides for about, 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to leave a lot of time afterwards to answer any of your questions. What we are going to learn today are best practices for managing weeds, and this includes what weeds are and some identification tips, and then how to prevent some of the common garden weeds that we'll see, uh, effective weed management tips and techniques, and then some information about using herbicides, aka weed killers. So, as an integrated pest management educator, I always like to start off by sharing what is integrated pest management for those that are not as familiar with it. And I also start off just about every one of my programs this way. So it might be a repeat for some of you. But IPM is a decision making process that uses science based strategies to solve the pest problems. It allows us to look at the system as a whole. In this case, it's going to be our garden. And then we're going to try to identify what the problem is. And oftentimes, what we see as the problem is actually symptoms of another problem. And that's kind of key because we want to always really focus on what that problem is so that we can resolve those symptoms. And then we want to identify, is it something that we can live with? And if we need to take action, then what? And with integrated pest management, we use a combination of different types of actions. It would be cultural controls, bolstering the health of the environment, or mechanical controls, the tools we use to manage the pests, biological controls, using living organisms to manage the pest, and then chemical controls. And these are the pesticides. And we always use these as a last resort, and we always use the least toxic possible. So IPM for managing weeds, it's going to be identification, prevention, early detection, and removal. It's that simple. It doesn't always seem that simple though, right? So I love to start with a quote. It always is really a fun way to start the programs, but I found this one that I thought was really great. I'd like to share with you. It's a weed is a plant that has mastered every survival skill except for learning how to grow in rows. Isn't that the truth? I feel like weeds sometimes just want to take over the entire garden. So, what is a weed? So, what might be a weed in my garden might not be a weed in your garden, and vice versa. A weed is essentially a plant that's growing in an undesirable place. What we find is that some plants thrive in our environment and will reseed readily. So, at my garden, chard and kale is considered a weed, or it could be. However, I still enjoy harvesting it and eating it, but it doesn't always grow where I want it to grow. Sometimes it's right in the middle of the garden path. Or borage, for instance, wonderful food for our bees and our native pollinators. However, it has a tendency to reseed itself everywhere. So in this case, these are weeds. So let's start. Remember, I said identification. If we're not able to identify the pest, then we're not going to be able to solve the pest. So I'm going to start off by sharing that the UCIPM website has this amazing resource for us. It's called the UCIPM Weed Gallery. It goes through all of the garden weeds that we might be faced with, as well as weeds that will show up in a lawn. It will break it down by the life cycle of that weed, the seasons that we'll see it growing, the environment of which it likes to grow in, and then some management tips to help you resolve the problem. So let's get to know our weeds. That's the number one trick. So some weeds are annuals. That means they sprout from seeds and then they reseed annually once a year. Some weeds are biannuals. So they're also going to sprout from seeds, but they're going to live 2 years. Their life cycle is going to be a 2-year life cycle. And then another category for weeds are going to be perennials. These are going to actually have a life cycle that's 2 years or longer, and they can grow from reseeding themselves and or from their root systems. And root systems can be tubers, corms, bulbs, pieces of stems, and traditional roots. So another thing we want to keep in mind is, when are we seeing the weeds? Are these weeds that are popping up after the rains during the cool rainy season, or are these weeds that are actually popping up in the dry summer months? From there, we're going to look at prevention. How can we prevent the weeds from growing in our garden, the ones that we've been able to identify? When we adjust the environment to make it less desirable for the weed to grow, that's the key part of prevention for weed management. It's adjusting the environment with cultural controls. So, what are some cultural controls that we can employ? So, we can start by looking at the soil and garden health. We understand if our soil is acidic, certain weeds are going to grow in those conditions, and certain weeds are going to grow in conditions of a more alkaline pH. Or some weeds will identify are going to thrive in nutrient poor soils versus others in nutrient rich. So we can look at this to help us identify how to correct the problem by adjusting the pH or the nutrients in the soil. We also can look at irrigation and drainage. This is going to be really helpful. Are the weeds, there are certain weeds that are indicators that the soil is really wet or poor draining. There's other weeds that thrive in dry soils. And then there are some weeds that thrive in hard, compact soils. So when we can identify what's going on, what weed is growing, it's going to help us identify, are we going to amend the soil to improve the drainage, or are we going to add compost to increase the water holding capacity? Do we need to aerate the soil to reduce compaction? These are things that we can look at to change the environment to reduce the weeds. And then some weeds are just hitchhikers. So we might notice that when we're on a hike, especially in the summer months, I notice we'll be walking on a trail, and the seed pods of many weeds are like Velcro, and they'll stick to our shoelaces or socks or pant legs. Even our pets can bring weeds in when they are hitchhiking onto their fur. But another thing to keep in mind that some of us haven't considered, if we have a lawn service coming to our properties, weeds can hitchhike on the equipment. So it's a good idea, if you do have a lawn service, is to let those people, your lawn service folks, use your equipment. Let them use your mowers and your weed whackers to prevent weeds from going from yard to yard. We want to reduce disturbing the soil, reduce the tilling and constant turning over. And the reason why is because some weeds, such as purslane, for instance, which grows a beautiful mat, but when it goes to flower, and if it's able to go to seed at that point, it can explode, leaving hundreds of seeds in the area. Now, not all those seeds are going to germinate and grow within that year. Sometimes the seeds can stay dormant in the soil for years to come. Now, the good news is oftentimes the seeds will kind of fall down into the soil, into the crevices, and then they are going to just exist, never in a desirable environment to germinate. But if we're turning the soil frequently, we're going to be bringing those seeds up into a favorable zone that's going to allow them to germinate, take hold, and persist. Another trick is outcompete the weeds with desirable plants. So when we plant densely, we're going to prevent weeds, because remember, weeds are opportunists. They're going to find a little spot that's open and available, that's perfect and desirable, and they're going to take over. So if we can outcompete them, we're going to see less weeds. We also can take advantage of planting cover crops. So for all of us that are growing food crops in our gardens, those raised beds of vegetables or little garden beds where we're growing food, if we're not growing food year round, rotating those crops, if we have a raised bed or a garden patch that's going to just be fallow for the season, it's a good idea just to pop in some fava beans or another cover crop of your choice. Not only is it going to continue to improve the health of the soil, but it's going to grow and crowd out any weeds that might want to come and make that space their home. Another fun tip I can share is mulch. Mulch is amazing. It works wonders. And the mulch I'm talking about is going to be organic mulch from from trees like wood chips or straw. Not only do when we put a nice thick layer of mulch on top of the soil, it's going to reduce weeds because weeds are less likely going to be able to germinate and then grow. However, if they do happen to germinate and sprout and start to grow, they're a heck of a lot easier to pull out because they're just living in that top layer of mulch. As mulch breaks down, it's adding nutrients to the soil. It's feeding the microorganisms in the soil and supporting the soil health. It saves water by reducing water evaporation rate significantly. And it also is going to reduce soil compaction and erosion. And another benefit is that it will keep the soil cool in the summer and warm in the winter. So it's a win-win across the board when we use mulch. However, the one caveat is we always want to make sure the mulch is away from the crown of the plant. That's where the branches or the top part of the plant and the root system meet. We always want to have that clear. And then we put a nice layer of mulch on the soil around our plants. The next tip that can help reduce weeds, believe it or not, is drip irrigation. So when we work with drip irrigation, it allows us to efficiently localize very specific areas of the garden to only water those areas. It allows us also to water deeply so we can provide adequate amount of water to our plants. When we work with drip irrigation, we're making direct contact with the soil. So there's going to be less water evaporation rate. So we're actually saving water. But above all, it's going to reduce weeds. And the reason why is because we're only watering the targeted plants that we want to water. The other areas of the garden are not getting watered. They're going to stay dry. So it's going to be less likely that weeds are going to thrive in those areas. So we're going to see less weeds around our garden. Isn't that cool? So let's review what cultural controls are. We're going to adjust our fertilizer schedule. And what that means, if we've been heavy-handed with synthetic fertilizers, we could maybe have been overdoing it. Or maybe we want to consider moving towards organic fertilizers. Organic fertilizers are going to be a healthier way, a more sustainable way to feed our plants. And we won't need, it'll be less risky to overdo it when we work with organics. In fact, it's really difficult to overdo it with organic fertilizers. We're going to consider amending the soil to increase water holding capacity or to help with compaction. We're going to offer our own mowing equipment to our hired gardeners. We're going to reduce disturbing the soil whenever possible. We're going to plant competitively and densely to reduce weeds. And we're going to apply mulch to protect the soil. And we're going to water just the planted areas, not the areas where we don't see plants. So already right there, by employing these techniques, we're reducing weeds. So now let's talk about mechanical controls, because I don't know about you, but I've got a garden full of weeds right now, and I already employ all of those practices. So what are the best ways to pull weeds or to remove weeds? It's going to be with weeding tools. Now, no one ever likes to hear this answer, but the best way to manage weeds is to hand pull them. Who's got time for that? But here's the deal. There's so many amazing tools on the market for standing up and hand pulling dandelions or getting into the nooks and crannies and cracks and crevices of patios and driveways, or other tools that are designed for harder to pull weeds. We have heavy duty weed pullers. How many of you have seen one of these or used one of these? I have to tell you, this is the coolest thing. I know endorsing any retailers, but I know they sell these at Jackson's in San Rafael, and I just love I kind of get really excited when I see one. It's crazy. I know. Total geek. Another really cool tool that's very easy to use and very economical and efficient is a weed torch. Uh, the deal is that they're just burning the weeds, especially effective in cracks and crevices, gravel walkways and driveways. However, there's a caveat. We only use this during the rainy season. Okay. So once the rains stop and the grasses and the weeds start to dry, this is not the time. We are not setting the state of California on fire. However, very effective way to manage weeds during the rainy season. Another really cool way to manage weeds is with steamers. Now, these are slower to meet the consumer market. We do have some on the market available for consumer, household gardeners to use. However, where we're seeing them is with the municipalities. They're starting to bring these tools in to manage weeds in public spaces. It's amazing. Another way to manage weeds is going to be with line trimmers and mowers. Simply just mowing the weeds before they go to seed is going to manage the weeds very well. Another trick that's one of my favorites is working with sheet mulch. This is the practice of layering multiple layers of cardboard or builder's paper overlapped so that they're completely covering the soil. We can leave the weeds in place. We don't even need to remove those weeds. And even if those weeds are knee high, we just step them down, put the cardboard down, multiple layers, and then we put no less than 3 inches of chips on top, or it can be a combination of compost and chips. And then after some time, the microbiology and those worms, they all are ignited and they start to decompose all of this goodness that is in the weeds. And what you're left with is beautiful soil. And the sheet mulch, depending on how many layers of cardboard you lay down, can be effective for, a year, 18 months. We can also work with grazing animals. This is very popular for all of us that live in Marin, or if we've been in San Francisco or other parts of the Bay Area, we're starting to see goats for rent to come in and take care of those weeds in your garden. It's kind of cool. So let's talk about some specific weed management. So for the best practices for managing annual and biannual weeds, remember these are the ones that go to seed. We want to hand pull them or remove them right when they have emerged. The trick here is to make sure we get them while they're young, before their root systems really take hold and become established. We can work with a garden hoe, which is an excellent way, or any other type of tool that might scrape the weeds off, because we're literally just cutting them off at the root system. However, the trick is to be very mindful that we're doing this when the soil has dried out. We don't want to get out there when the soil is wet, because we don't want to compact that soil. Another great way to manage annual and biannual weeds is working with that weed torch or that weed steamer. But above and beyond, we always want to make sure we avoid letting them go to seed, because that is how they reproduce. Now, perennial weeds, a little different. We're going to dig them out. We're going to pull them out. We're going to cut them down. We're going to mow them. We're going to work with that weed torch or that steamer. We're going to employ those practices of smothering them with like sheet mulch. We're going to also avoid letting them go to seed if that's how they spread. Or if it's a case where they grow and spread with their like a rhizome or a comb or any type of spreading root system, then we can insert a root barrier to prevent them from growing beyond a certain area of our garden. A couple things to keep in mind is if we have a situation where we go outside like today, because we're going to be really pumped to tackle weeds after this program, right? And it's a beautiful day. It's still cool, but sunny. And it just is like, wow, the weeds are really overwhelming. It's easy to get overwhelmed, but guess what? It's a good idea if you can identify who the real top-notch problem weeds are, the toughies, we want to prioritize and we want to get rid of those first. If you're newer to gardening and you're not able to identify who the toughies are, then you're just going to want to methodically go section by section, and you're going to want to start to observe, and you might even let some of the weeds get a little bit more mature so that you could properly identify them. But for me, when the minute I see invasive blackberries or poison oak or thistles, those are my three worst offenders in my garden, and I'm going to hand pull them. Yes, I hand pull are invasive blackberries and poison oak. Now, here's the trick. When they're little, they are very easy to pull out. And yes, I get poison oak just like anybody else. But guess what? I'm wearing long sleeves, I'm wearing gloves, and I'm using a tool to dig out the poison oak, and I'm then dropping it into a paper bag that I can then roll up and dispose of. It's not advised to put it in the green can, because then when we get to the green waste facility, someone else might get affected by the poison oak. However, the thing is that afterwards, with my gloves still on, I get Technu and I'm cleaning that oils off of my gloves with the Technu, and I'm cleaning my tools with the Technu so that I'm not then further spreading those oils. But trust me, when the poison oak and that invasive blackberry, when they're little, they pull right up easy peasy. Now, thistle, same thing. The minute you start to see them, just pop them up. Their spines aren't even stiff yet, so they're actually quite soft when they're young, and you can just pop them right up. Invite your friends over for a social distanced weed party. So this is really fun. I did this last year when we were all, under COVID restrictions, when we were able to get out a little bit, but we were masked up. I gave everyone their 10 square foot area. We all were spread out really well, and we were able just to pull some weeds. So it's another way to get a lot of weeding done that could be overwhelming, and have some fun and some social distancing, gatherings. And then we really want to understand that a question that comes up a lot is, can I put weeds in the compost? We do not want to put weeds in the compost unless we are 100% sure that that weed is not a spreader or it's not carrying any seeds at all. And then we want to be super mindful that we're not planting a pest. So, what does that really mean? Oxalis is not native to California, or at least this variety of oxalis, which is our, sourgrass or Bermuda oxalis or buttercup oxalis. But I think we all know it by its beautiful little yellow flower, and then it pops up the minute the rains start. Well, what it is, it's a perennial that spreads by little bulblets, and it is very tenacious. In fact, it is it frustrates a lot of people. Let's just put it that way. Might be one of the worst weeds that we have growing in our areas. But here's the deal. If we are persistent and we start pulling this weed at the first sight, when those leaves, those little clover-like leaves have just emerged, every time we pull this plant, it is going to get weaker because it's not able to photosynthesize. It's not able to feed itself. And over time, it's going to get weaker and weaker. I've heard people say they've tried to sift out the bulblets, and that's too much work as far as I'm concerned. And what I've learned from friends that are also professional gardeners, and also clients or customers I meet in the aisle of stores and such, is it is not unheard of if you are persistent and very aggressive with hand pulling the oxalis. In a number of years, yes, it will take a number of years, but you can get there. It could be a situation where it's just 15 minutes on a weekend or two, right after the rains have occurred, where you might just see a handful of oxalis pop up. And then over time, you will have eradicated it. I know it sounds crazy, but guess what? You can do it. And when we talked about planting a pest, I have a very unfortunate personal story I'd like to share. So in the late 90s, when I was a professional gardener, I worked for a lot of clients all around the Bay Area. And Heliochrysum was very popular. Everybody wanted to have Heliochrysum in their container plants. It was a nice accent color. It was trending. And then in the early 2000s, I moved out of state for a while to further my career in the garden industry. And when I came back 5 years later, I had heard that Heliochrysum had become an invasive plant in California. Well, I couldn't believe that. I was just like, well, where is that invasive? I had no idea. I thought maybe the desert or something. Well, I was on one of my favorite hikes, which is Mount Tam, Pantold down to Stinson. And I'm coming around the bend on the west side of Tam, and I see an entire bank of Heliochrysum. And I was horrified because I know I personally had planted many Heliochrysum, little 4-inch, in beautiful container plantings for many clients throughout Marin. Now, it took me a while to realize that it was not me single-handedly uh, spreading this plant throughout Marin County. However, I just like to let you know we all learn from mistakes. We need to be really careful or just be aware that there can be unintended consequences even with plants. Innocent little plants can go sideways. So there's this really cool website called the California Invasive Plant Council. I invite you to go check it out. There's a lot of great information on plants that are invasive to California and then how to manage them effectively. And they have this really cool campaign called Plant Right, where they've partnered with retail nurseries throughout California to educate the retail nursery, the associates of that nursery, and the public about what plants are invasive in California. And let's not sell those anymore. Let's work with alternatives that are just as beautiful. So now let's talk about the pesticides. So what about using pesticides for weed management? Pesticides that kill weeds are called herbicides. And I can share that it is our natural instinct to want to go for a product just to spray it, to kill it, just to be done with it. However, there is no silver bullet. And we need to employ all of the other things that I talked about, especially if we're going to go for an eco-friendly herbicide. Because if all of those other practices are not in place, this is going to be a waste of time and money. And if there's weed seeds around the property and we're spraying herbicides when they've already gone to seed, it's not going to solve the problem. So first thing we want to do is we want to read the label. So of course, we're working with eco-friendly herbicides, because they're the less toxic. And we see this label here. We see it. It says fast-acting weed and grass killer. Wow, kills all types of weeds and grasses. That sounds great. That sounds like something that I need for my garden. It's in a concentrate, so that means I'm going to have to hand mix it myself. All right, I can do that. I'm sure I can kind of eyeball and see, like, we just mix it with water, right? It's even registered for organic use. So that means it's safe, right? However, here we go. It's the active ingredients that are in the smallest font and dark print and very hard to see and understand. And so a lot of times we have to make sure we have our reading glasses or some type of magnifying glass. And even then, it's going to be a little challenging. But if we don't understand what the active ingredients are and how they're intended to work, it's going to be really hard to understand what is the outcome of this product. What are we to expect? Are we going to expect that the weed's going to die immediately? It's hard to say. So let's look at the back of the label. So we all are familiar with buying pesticides in the store. They come with that little booklet on the back. I would like to share, if it's a product that I'm going to be using, or if it's a concentrate, it's going to be inevitable that a little bit of that pesticide is going to kind of spill down on the booklet. So I'll take the booklet off and store it somewhere that I'm going to be able to keep it clean and always refer to it. But it's very, very important that we take the time to read the label first. The label is going to give us a lot of information. So already out the gate, I could see, how to use this product. It's going to be a contact, non-select, broad spectrum, foliar applied grass and weed killer. So that means it has to contact the tissue, the green vegetation, by a spray. That it's a non-select, that means it's going to kill anything it comes in contact with. So if I've got weeds between my, prize winning roses that are already leafed out, those rose leaves might get, killed as well. We also see that it's going to be, non-translocated. The mode of action is non-translocate, which means it's not moving through the cell tissue of the plant. It is rainproof when dry, and it's people and pet safe when used as directed. Well, rainproof when dry and people and pet safe really sounds good, right? That's what I'm going for. But what does that really mean? Rainproof. So when we use pesticides, regardless if it's an insecticide, a fungicide, or an herbicide, we want to only apply them when there is no rain, frost, or excessive heat in the forecast for 24 to 48 hours. What makes these products eco-friendly is that once they're dry on the plant, there's no residuals that can leach into groundwater or impair the environment. Now, people and pest safe when used as directed. It's very important. Eco-friendly products are going to be people and pet safe when we follow the directions. I'm not going to point any fingers or judge anyone, because I myself am, do this. We don't always read the label, right? Again, we think because we can buy it, it's safe to use. Oh, how difficult can it be? Spray, spray, spray. All right. Did I read the label? No. Oh dear. I just realized that it's raining tomorrow or raining later today, and I sprayed it and it's just going to get washed away. So just some things I want to really kind of share, because this is the challenging part of the equation. Another thing I like to share is to understand how these products work. They're broken up into a lot of different categories, and this is where things start to get a little complicated. So herbicides can be a narrow spectrum select herbicide, which means it could be like a broadleaf weed killer for a lawn. It's only going to kill those broadleaf weeds and not the lawn. Or a broad spectrum non-select, like we were just looking at. It's going to kill all types of grasses and weeds. It can kill anything it comes in contact with. So if that's going to be, if it accidentally gets on your lettuces or your salvias, it's going to kill those too. Some weeds are contact kills, where it's going to kill what it comes in contact with. And some are going to be a systemic or work as a translocated mode of action, where it gets absorbed into the tissue of the plant and moves through the structure of that plant and kills it from kind of the inside out a little bit. Not exactly scientific, but that's how I equate it. And then there's pre-emergence. Now, pre-emergence are those things that we will apply to the top of soil. And it creates like an invisible film. We don't see it, but that's how pre-emergence work. And this invisible film then is in place so that when weed seeds are blown over, they're not able to penetrate the soil. So then they're not able to germinate. However, what many of us don't know is we don't want to walk on that area, because if we walk on that soil after we've put the pre-emergent down, let's just say a few days or a week later, we're going to break that invisible seal, and now making that product completely ineffective. Post-emergence are used once we apply them to weeds that have already germinated and have sprouted. So being familiar with these terms can help you identify how we use the products and when we use the products. Timing is important. This is the tough part because a lot of times when the weeds emerge, especially during the rainy season, it's cold outside. We have shorter daylight hours. So a lot of times we're, maybe not able to get outside till after, 5 or 6 o'clock at night because we've got full work days. And then by that time it's dark. So the rainy season isn't always favorable for weed management. And however, this is the thing. This is the best time to manage weeds. If it's the rainy season weeds, we need to get out there when they've just emerged. Timing is important. So when we're talking about herbicides, there are some products that are just burn down, top kills, and they work best when the weeds are young, before those root systems have established themselves. There are other products that are systemics or translocators that are going to could take up to about a week or so, because it's going to take time for it to get into the tissue of that plant and destroy it or break that plant tissue down. Some herbicides can persist in plants and soil for long periods of time. This is going to really be with a lot of the synthetic fertilizers that might say they control weeds for 3 months or 6 months or a year. Well, check this out. Let's say we've used some of those products. Let's say we use some of those products today. It's February. And man, we do not have weeds for the entire spring or summer. But then it's fall. And I know the best time to plant plants in my garden is fall, because it's right before the rainy seasons, the air temperatures start to cool down, really gives me time for my plants to become established. But I forgot I put down this like year-long weed block. That's this chemical that's staying in the soil. I plant my plants. Guess what? They all die. And I'm like, what the heck? I go to the nursery. I'm like, you sold me bad plants. When all the time it was the product I used 6, 8 months earlier. And then we have to understand that some active ingredients are going to move through the soil very quickly and access the groundwater, which is then going to be toxic for the waterways. Something I like to share is that no pesticide is risk-free, regardless of if it is a synthetic, an eco-friendly, and especially if it's a DIY home remedy. We need to understand the unintended consequences. So this picture right here is a rose that has been hit during its dormant season, while it was completely innocently just resting without any leaves on it through the winter months. There was some glyphosate drift. What drift is when we're applying a product and there's a breeze that's more than 5 miles an hour. That pesticide can blow in that breeze and land on other plants. So big rule of thumb is we never apply a pesticide, regardless of if it's eco-friendly or do-it-yourself home remedy. We never apply it when there's a breeze more than 5 miles an hour. But we also really want to understand how these non-select herbicides, regardless if they're eco-friendly or a DIY home remedy, they can impair other plants as well. And a lot of times it just shows up as like black spots on an evergreen shrub. And we might think it's a fungal problem. And then we're applying these fungicides and we're wondering why that problem didn't really resolve itself. Well, it's because it was an herbicide burn. Understand that pesticides, regardless again, many of the synthetic pesticides are going to be contaminants of soil and groundwater, and especially when they're improperly applied or overused. Another thing I can share is pesticides can damage and be very detrimental to the soil microbiology. And more is not better. So a story I want to share about, when we're talking about herbicides, this is not an unusual story I hear. I hear people, they're frustrated with their weeds, but they also want to be environmentally conscientious. So they're going to try an eco-friendly product. But again, without understanding how it works, it's very easy, or without understanding even the weed's lifestyle or life cycle, it's going to be really hard to understand what is your expected outcome of that. Are you expecting that the weed is just going to be killed and never to come back? And so let's use an example of crabgrass. I hear this very frequently. So crabgrass is one of those weeds that spreads by seeds. And if we haven't gotten out there and pulled it out before it goes to seed, there's going to be a lot of seeds in the area. And so let's say we're out there and we're like, okay, I don't want to pull it. I just, that's ridiculous. I want to get something really easy, like a eco herbicide. So I'm going to use my eco-friendly herbicide. I'm going to spray the crabgrass. That one died, but then more come, they just keep growing back. This product didn't work. All the while not realizing that there was more seeds out there that were germinating, because we didn't realize this. That's how this plant grows and thrives. So we think the eco-friendly didn't work. We know that eco-friendlies are not as strong. I'm just going to break down. I'm not going to tell any of my neighbors. I have some shame, but I'm going to go for a synthetic crabgrass killer because I got to get rid of this crabgrass. So I'm going to spray it. And then I'm going to notice more comes up. And I'm like, oh, I bet I didn't use it, enough of it. I'm going to spray more because I trust that these synthetics really are supposed to work. I must not have applied it right. So do you see the mentality that we get trapped in, is that we think that sometimes that the eco-friendlies didn't work and the synthetics are going to, that the eco-friendlies are just an alternative to the synthetics. But all the while, it's that we didn't understand how the plant reproduces itself, and that if there's still seeds there, they're going to continue to grow. It's not that one product worked better or didn't work better, and more is never better. And at this point, we're just, spraying a lot of toxins around the property. So anyway, I hope that made sense. I feel like I got a little jumbled there, but anyway. Let's talk about those do-it-yourself home remedy weed killers. I hear about this all the time. So it's the dish soap, it's the salt and the vinegar. I'm sure all of you have heard about it as well. So I want to share that the only true soap on the market nowadays is Castile soap. And that's under the brand name Dr. Bronner's. There might be some other off brands that you can find out there, but the one that everyone knows about is Dr. Bronner's. Dish soap is not soap, it's detergent. So I'd like to invite you to have a look at your dish soap and try to navigate the active ingredients that are in that dish soap, because a lot of them are going to be very toxic. In fact, more toxic than an eco herbicide that you can buy that's intended for killing weeds. Some of the active ingredients are going to be acute aquatic toxic, cause acute aquatic toxicity, and some are likely human carcinogens and groundwater contaminants. Salt is extremely detrimental to the soils. It's detrimental to the worms and soil organisms as well. And if anyone can remember history class, when the Crusaders would come in and take over a village, harvest all the food from their crops, and then salt their crops before they'd leave so that those villagers could not grow food again. Salt is a big no-no for your gardens. And then vinegar. When we use vinegar to kill weeds, we need to use with extreme caution. We need to understand that household vinegar, which is just about 5% acetic acid, this is what we're using for cooking and salad dressings. This is not strong enough to kill weeds, okay? What we're looking at is when we get to 11% acetic acid, which is still not quite strong enough to kill weeds. It's strong enough, though, to burn our skin and can cause eye damage. Now, horticultural vinegar that we're seeing on the market right now, it's kind of all the rage. It's 20 to 30% acetic acid, which can cause blindness. It is corrosive to metals. It can burn our skin. So please, please, please keep this in mind. If you want to do it yourself home remedy, you could use boiling water. Boiling water kills weeds. It's not so easy to use, and we need to use extreme caution not to burn ourselves. So for more information about pesticides, we can always go and check out this really awesome website called OMRI. It's the Organic Materials Review Institute. OMRI is going to have a list of pesticides that are going to that have gone through a very high standard of organic certification. So if it's on the OMRI website, then you know it's gone through this very, the certification that's very high, of a very high standard. And then we also have this really cool website called the National Pest Information Center. This is where you can go and read about how active ingredients work. Okay, pretty cool. So just to remind you, we have the UCI PM Weed Gallery for helping you identify weeds. And then Our Water, Our World, we have a fact sheet on controlling weeds in your garden. Please have a look at it, check it out. It's going to be really helpful. And in close, what I'd like to share is weeds are flowers too, once you get to know them. So I just like to thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you are inspired to get out there and tackle some weeds. I hope that you found this program informative and supportive and helpful. And I just want to let you know, if any questions ever come up, you can always reach out to me. Again, I'm Suzanne Bontempo, and you can find more information about me at my website, which is plantharmony.org.
That was great, Suzanne. Thank you. Lots of information. I was busy taking lots of notes. And we have some questions. So please feel free to stay. We will stay as long as folks have questions. Excuse me. I'm pulling out questions from the chat box, but if you all wouldn't mind taking just 2 seconds while you're still here to click on a link that Tracy just shared to give us a little bit of feedback about today's presentation while we're answering questions. That really helps all of our organizations continue to do the work we do as nonprofits. So we'll also be including that evaluation link when we send the follow-up video link. So Suzanne, let's start off with a couple questions we had specific to garden and soil. The one question was how to get soil tested, especially if you're starting off kind of with a new garden or something like that.
There's different soil testing labs in the area. I know one of them is Waypoint. There's a couple others that you can, I'll just do an internet search, soil testing lab, San Francisco Bay Area, and a few will come up, or you can do soil testing lab Marin. If you're not able to find a soil testing lab by doing a search, feel free to email me and I'll send you 3 that you can choose from.
Okay, great. Thank you. Also in that category, can you speak to mosquito bits? Is that safe for soil?
Yes, mosquito bits are beneficial bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis. It is a very narrow range larvicide, and it is, when we apply it to the soil, it is only going to impact fungus gnat larvae and mosquito larvae. So they feed off of it and they die, but nothing else is impacted by it.
Okay, great. And we've got a group of questions about about just general weeds. Should weeds be put in the trash can and not the green can, or how do you decide?
That's a good question. So weeds can go in the green can. The only thing you don't want to put in the green can is poison oak. So because that can actually affect someone else down the line. But weeds, weed seeds, all of that, get it right in that green can. Yep. Get it off site, because at the green waste facility, their compost is heating up well hot enough to kill off all those seeds.
Okay, great. And we've got some really good specific questions about bamboo. Someone suggested to this person that they use bleach.
No. Please
Yeah.
don't put bleach on your bamboo. That's so again, these homemade remedies, these things that we hear on the internet, This is can do more harm than good, and it's not going to give you the end result you're looking for. So bamboo, here's a couple things with bamboo. Bamboo is in the grass family. It loves water. So one thing we can do is stop giving it water. Remove water from where it's going. That's going to reduce it. The next thing is every time we have a bamboo little cane start to sprout, a bamboo shoot, we just break it off. Okay. So now we are keeping the plant from thriving. It's going to get weaker. Bamboo, sadly, is one of those tasks where you have to get a pickaxe and shovels and try to remove most of it. Understanding what variety bamboo you have and understanding how deep the rhizomes go. A lot of times they're going to be about 18 inches down. So that's how far down we have to dig. So yeah, what was a good idea in like the 80s and 90s is now proving to not be such a good idea anymore, right? It's sad. But with those tricks, it's going to be a little bit more costly because we most likely have to hire some people to tackle that job unless you've got your Popeye arms out there and you can do it yourself.
Great. We have a question about root barrier. What would you suggest for creating a root barrier?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a product that you purchase. It's a product that you would purchase at like a landscape supply store.
Okay. And I think actually another participant said, I love my Xeriscape weed cloth. It's the only brand they find works, which thank you for sharing. There's another question about mulch. Someone said that San Rafael wildfire ordinance looks like it prohibits wood chip mulch, and it's been their go-to. Any other ideas or options?
Okay, so for fire safety, we are not putting mulch up the first 5 feet around the perimeter of the house. That is absolutely going to be either decomposed granite, hardscape, it could be gravel, but in the garden beds, we can use wood chips. That is going to be appropriate. It's going to be safe. And the key here is making sure that the plants stay well hydrated. Hydrated appropriate for the plant material.
Okay. And someone's asking about alfalfa as mulch. Is that okay?
I know people use alfalfa as a cover crop, and then it's going to be considered green manure when we mow it. So in that case, it's considered a mulch.
Okay. We've got a lot of people, like you would expect, fighting oxalis. And I'll come back to the brick patio in just a second, but we've got a couple questions about oxalic. So somebody has been tackling it for 6 years, never got rid of it, skipped 1 year, and it came back with a vengeance. So they want advice. And another person has asked, their garden is overrun with them. Are there other tips besides the ones you mentioned, like a steamer?
Okay, so oxalis is a real bad boy, right? And is going to come back with a vengeance. So again, it's persistence. And what I mean by persistence is, it's almost a 24/7 job at the beginning. I mean, and I'm exaggerating, but that's how it feels, right? It's really until we can eradicate all of that oxalis on our property within that season, it is a big job. And then the minute we see a new one sprouting up, remove it. And then, so it is a lot. It is going to be the priority that's going to, really control your attention for a while. And just missing 1 year, yeah, I'm sorry, because all that hard work you put in just got erased. So if it is an area that doesn't have other plants, so if it's not in my flower beds, if it's just like maybe along the fence line where I don't have anything planted or in other areas of my garden, you can sheet mulch. Sheet mulching oxalis works very well. However, the trick is that we're going to do multiple layers of cardboard, not just 2, but we might do even like 4 or 6, like really, really smother them. And then the 3 inches of mulch on top, no less than 3 inches, and then bam. Okay. And that's going to prevent that oxalis from growing in that area. I haven't worked with steamers on oxalis, and nor have I worked with like a torch, because it's growing from the bulb. Okay, it's not growing from its roots. It's like when we pull it out, when we're hand pulling, the bulb is still there, and there's still energy for that plant to grow again. So that is why the best way to manage oxalis is to be very persistent with hand pulling, so that we can reduce the energy in that plant, make it weaker and weaker. The steamers and torches are just top kills. It's only going to kill the top. And so maybe that's helpful. I mean, it'll certainly reduce the energy in it, but we'd have to hit it every single time we start to see it sprout.
Okay, great. A couple specific plants that we've got questions about. One is how to get rid of burr clover in the lawn.
Oh yeah, I have that in my, well, that lawn that you saw a picture of is really just a mat of weeds, and that's one of those ones I will go through and prioritize. So it's already starting to sprout. You definitely want to remove it before it goes to seed, because all those little I mean, there's like hundreds per plant. So again, knowing the life cycle, understanding that we will remove it before. And here's the cool thing: if you have it in the lawn, guess what? If you don't want to hand pull it or, dig it out, the weed torch, you can spot weed your lawn with the weed torch. The weed torch is only going to kill what it comes in contact with. It's just burning it back. So you can get between perennials and between your prize winning roses without impacting any of those plants. It's going to burn just the tissue it comes in contact with. So you can go through and spot weed with the weed torch, but hand pulling is going to be the best way to manage it. And it's not as aggressive. Well, it's aggressive, but it's a little bit of a different situation than oxalis. Oxalis is like, it really goes from like little tiny sprouts to like full yellow flower blanket in like a matter of days, where the burr clover is a little bit more civilized. So I can go out there right now and pull. I could spend like, 15, 20 minutes. All right, I got bored with that. Well, maybe tomorrow I'll go out and do the same thing. Maybe my husband will tackle it a couple days. You can kind of do it in, stages, and we've got a little bit of time before it goes to flower. So it's not like an urgent rush.
Got it. And what is the best way to clean moss off a brick patio?
Oh, well, there's this really cool product on the market. Well, there's a couple of them. One is by, I think it's Lily Miller Moss Out, and the other is Safer Brand Moss and Algae Killer. Both of them are potassium, salts of fatty acids, and it just acts as a desiccant. It dehydrates that moss, and then it's really easy just to, we water it, we spray it on. It's usually a hose end sprayer. And then we get just a stiff broom later, and we can just kind of scrape it off.
Okay. All right. Any advice for getting rid of, did I ask, a bindweed?
Oh yeah, that is a bugger for sure. I was certainly faced with that when I lived in Olima. That was the number one culprit. But again, just understand that the bindweed, the root systems in the bindweed go like 6, 10, 20 feet down. So I noticed when I was constantly pulling it the minute I saw it, I was really able to keep it kind of in a reasonable pace. But if I let it go, it would take over the world. So again, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, if we didn't have weeds in the garden, what else would we be doing? I mean, come on. That's what it's all about, is getting out there and getting into our garden beds and fussing and pulling those weeds. And, if if we just want like a manicured picture perfect garden, then we'll most likely need to hire someone to do that. I'll tell you, all the years I worked as a professional gardener, I mean, weeds kind of kept me employed. So I just got to just be real here. You know, the weeds, uh, yeah, that's just, they're our nemesis. We just got to get out there and it keeps us going, you know, and then it gets us to notice if there's something going on with our plants, or notice if there's a break in the irrigation, or they actually are our friends. And, you know, weeds really kind of help us identify other things. You know, I'd like to say that weeds a lot of times are more our allies than our enemies, but that's just me.
Yep, yep. And I know, especially with integrated pest management and this whole idea of, is it really a problem in a municipal setting? Um, a lot of municipalities have changed their, aesthetic standards, and some weeds are okay. And sheet mulching and having, just a bed that's kind of, barren to the public maybe, but it's doing the work of killing all the weeds long term with those layers of sheet mulch. And I think a lot of it is aesthetics. And as one of our participants said, Pam said, weeds are our social network. uh, okay, so a couple more questions. Actually, somebody wanted to just have you repeat the name of the moss killer you mentioned.
Oh, one brand is Lily Miller Moss Out, and the other brand is Safer brand Moss and Algae Killer.
Okay, great.
And I know that you can find one of those products at hardware stores around Marin County.
Great. Got a couple more. Removing anise. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Can you tell I'm a newbie gardener? Anise, and also someone else has wild onions all over their yard.
So again, those are going to be a little bit more difficult because we actually have to get like the bulb of the plant out. However, so digging them out and monitoring, making sure, at least for the fennel, it doesn't go to seed. But yeah, the yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pause or be indecisive or anything, but yeah, hand pulling, and again, just persistence and dig them out. I know sometimes they're kind of a pain, you know, there's just so many, but over time, you know, the wild onion, that's just such a short season, you know, after they kind of die off in a couple of months and then they're not there until next year. So if we can kind of try to, you know, similar with the oxalis, we remove the tops so they're not able to photosynthesize and get energy for the next year.
Great. And another participant asked about putting lots of weeds in the green can. A weekend's work would fill up my black can for the next 3 weeks. Can I pile it up and then cover it with a large tarp?
You'd want to be really careful that if your weeds are in seed, if they have flowered and they're gone to seed, those seeds can blow away. Right now, nothing has gone to seed that I can think of. I mean, I could be wrong, and I certainly live in a slightly different environment. So you could have weeds already going to seed. In fact, maybe the Poa annua has already gone to seed. I'm not sure, but just be really mindful that if it's already in seed, that's going to be your priority to get in the green can. And if it's just a lot of like grassy stuff that hasn't gone to seed yet, or, you know, whatever leafy material, sure, pile it up.
Okay. And actually, here's a really important related question. Someone's asking about how to get rid of Scotch broom. And I know there's some fantastic volunteer opportunities to hand pull with weed wrenches, French broom and Scotch broom out in open space, and it's really fun. But I know there's a trick to how to dispose of them. And so that's the question, how to get rid of Scotch broom and how best to dispose of it.
I'm going to go back to this really awesome tool. This is how we pull Scotch broom. And then as far as disposal, well, I would have to call, I guess I would invite you to call the municipality or
actually, I think I could speak to that, Suzanne.
Yeah. How do you dispose of it? I mean, I would just,
I think, it's challenging because you don't generally want to move it because it can spread the seeds.
Well, you want to pull it before it's gone to flower. That's number one.
But I think, and we should probably maybe follow up with this after we check in our follow-up email, but I believe we don't want to put it in our green cans because our compost in Marin may not get hot enough to destroy the seeds. I seem to remember that. So why don't we check on the disposal, and we'll put that in our follow-up email because yeah, because I think that's an important question. It might just need to go into the trash can rather than the green waste. Would that orange hand tool work with bamboo?
You can try, but the thing is that Scotch broom, we're pulling out this, by the trunk, the whole root system, and bamboo spreads by rhizomes. So the way to eradicate the bamboo is to remove those rhizomes.
Okay. And someone was also asking related to the safe things to remove bamboo. Is there a tool you can recommend that would dig into cement, like ground covered traveling roots? Sorry. Dig into the cement-like ground covered traveling roots.
Okay, I guess you'd have to rent a bobcat or get a pickaxe.
No, sorry, I misread the question. It's just saying that the roots are really hard like cement, but how do you try and get to those? Is there a tool that would help with the bamboo roots that go laterally?
Yeah, digging them out if a shovel and a pickaxe isn't working, then you can try a digging bar. And if that's not working, then you have to get equipment, machinery like a bobcat in to, remove it. So.
Okay. And the last question I think we've got is someone asked about a weed roller.
A weed roller?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, I don't know. While I'm looking for that, if you're still on, okay. If you're still on, or Tracy, if you can look back to see who asked about the weed roller, we can try and get some more information. And someone else asked if compost can be used as mulch, or do you need to put mulch on top of the compost?
Oh, great question. Yes, compost can be used as mulch.
Okay. And some of you might have heard of the Marin Carbon Project that's out in West Marin with John Wick. And check out their website because he has some really interesting information about how compost can be used to sequester carbon, and has a whole protocol that that we can use in our own backyards that have that added benefit. All right. And do we have any other questions? And I think we talked about the moss overgrowth on brick patios.
I just want to clarify that those two products, those were the names, but those brands, the Lily Miller Moss Out and Safer brand, we want to really make sure that we're buying the products that have the correct active ingredient. So we want to make sure that it is Moss Out, Lily Miller Moss Out. Yeah, you're safe. You can only, sorry.
Okay. And thank you, Tiana. The long-handled tool with a small roller at the base, which pulls up small weeds, maybe it's called a hula roller. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that. But yeah, there's so many. But here's the thing. There are so many amazing weeding tools on the market nowadays because people know the best way to manage weeds is to mechanically remove them. And so they've gotten smart and they've found ways to, make tools that are going to be effective, but not like break your back. So that is why I'm like, hey, let's just find a tool that works for you to make it fun and easy and not a backbreaker.
Yep. Yep. And I would, I'm a very newbie gardener. And obviously in the last year, spending a lot of time at home with my kids, we invested in some really fun tools. And there's one that pulls up dandelions that's super easy so you don't have to bend down. And there's another one that gets weed cracks that my 8-year-old loves to use. And we love using weed wrenches when we're out on open space. Related to that, somebody was asking about Scotch broom. Can it just be left to die where we pull them? And that's certainly the approach when I'm volunteering with Marin County Open Space. That's exactly what we do. We pull the Scotch broom or French broom and we leave it right where it is. and it desiccates and breaks down pretty quickly. And
The-
Suzanne's got this great slide of all these tools.
yeah, the thing is that again, the Scotch broom, it can't be in a flowering or seeded phase. So if it's already gone to seed, so again, timing, understanding the life cycle of that plant and removing it before it goes to seed.
Great. And I have a little bit of clarification about the weed roller. The question is, if something's pulling up those small weeds mechanically, will those weeds re-sow or the seeds into the ground, or is it okay just to kind of pull them and drop it like
When it sounds like it works very similar to a weeding hoe, where we're just scraping off the tops. And unless it's a weed that can, like bindweed, where all it needs is a little piece of stem and it'll shoot a whole new plant. If it's an annual grassy weed, or, again, understanding what that weed is, how does that plant grow? How is it propagating by other, plant parts? Then yes, if we pull it and we turn it into the soil, it'll just shoot more plants. But if it is something that has a root system and once it's pulled out, it's just going to perish, then that's fine.
That's
So
great. So back to weed identification being
yeah,
a crucial
yeah,
part
and
of this.
understanding what you're up against, so that you can have success.
Great. Okay. Um, and sorry, the ideas for moving weeds from gravel walkways.
Yeah, that was working with the weed torch or the steamer, or if you wanted, have a go with boiling water. Just for all of these things, be careful not to burn yourself.
Okay. And then somebody missed the answer to the earlier question of how to get rid of burr clover in the grass.
Well, I shared hand pulling is the best way, or you can work with the weed torch or steamer.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, I think that is all of our questions. And as Suzanne said, you're welcome to also reach out to her directly at plantharmony.org, right? Or com.
Yep. .org.
.org. Okay, great. And of course, I want to especially thank all of our participants for joining us today. Tracy's going to just pop into the chat box our very quick evaluation, if you wouldn't mind just answering that quickly for us, because it helps us as a nonprofit to have feedback on these free programs we offer. And also just remember that UC Master Gardeners is a wonderful resource, especially their help desk. And Yard Smart Marin, we've pulled a lot of the most common weeds that you'll find in your gardens into a visual one-click solution that you can help identify. And then usually we connect to vetted resources like from our Water Our World or UC IPM. And I want to say a special thank you not only to our collaborating organizations, but especially thank you for joining us, those of you who are volunteers with UC Master Gardeners. We're so glad to see many of you here this morning. And last thing is I'll just remind everyone that we'll be hosting one more in this series of 3 free webinars on Saturday, March 13th. We'll send you a link to register for that or to share, please, with anyone you think might be interested. And that last topic will be about bringing in beneficial bugs into our gardens and yards. Right. Anything else that you can think of, Suzanne?
No, thanks everyone for joining us this morning. It's been really fun. And yeah, go get them.
That's great. So we'll be following up with an email with the evaluation and a second email when the video from today is available online. And we really appreciate all of you joining us. And thank you. Have a great, hopefully great weather weekend. Take care.
Yeah, there's everyone's faces. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Have a great day.